How do you foster an ongoing dialogue feedback within your team?
I use the term lead with intent.
There is a management side to leadership, and you have to be really good at it. But there's certain ways that you have to deliver that feedback in a way that's going to be positive.
We have these unrealistic expectations of being perfect leaders.
Very worthwhile for leaders to mess up once in a while, right?
Yeah.
I think it does help you learn and grow and be sharp.
Where there's high expectations, there has to be high support.
Know when to lead and make sure you're not trying to manage people, but lead them. And I think that's a different mindset as well.
Yeah. Important thing around the feedback here is also you need to have the time.
If you're not screwing up from time to time as a leader, you're not being a very effective leader, because you're not pushing your leadership and trying new things. Catch people doing something right or catch them doing something good.
Yeah.
And just it takes 10 seconds out of your day to recognize that. Don't be afraid of messing up. You'll learn from that.
I think the one who's receiving it is like, oh my God, they're actually noticing, right? I'm not just invisible.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you're watering the plant, right? Even more. So it will grow even more. I think that's so important, that it's not like just pointing fingers and saying you're not good at that, not good at that, right? You're actually showing and saying, this is amazing, right? Keep doing it. You are listening to Leadership Manufacturing Podcast. I'm your host, Sannah Vinding. I'm a strategic leader with over 20 years of experience in B2B marketing, product development, and team empowerment. I'm passionate about sharing insight and tools to help professionals enhance their leadership skills. And in each episode, we discuss relevant topics for leaders like you. And we're offering practical strategies and valuable insight. And all this is to help you refine your leadership style and drive success in your role. I interview professionals within the manufacturing industry and the distribution sector, and they all share their knowledge around leadership. Make sure to follow us, like and subscribe, and check out our YouTube channel and the website. Search for Leadership in Manufacturing. I have a new episode for you: how to create a feedback culture that drives team growth. In this episode, I'm joined by two remarkable leaders, Damien Croft, General Manager at Norcom, and Shane Zutz, he's the Vice President and Human Resources at DTK. And together we explore the art of giving and receiving feedback. And it's so essential for fostering innovation and empowering teams. We discuss how to trust and how open culture are vital to effective feedback, and how this principle can transform your leadership approach. So whether you're leading a small team or a large organization, this episode is packed with insights that can help you build a culture of continuous growth and improvement. So enjoy the episode. And I'm so thrilled to welcome back two exceptional guests, Damien Croft and Shane Zutz. A little bit more about them. So Damien Croft is the General Manager at Norcom. He's driven P&L growth, team development, and also culture rooted in trust and collaboration. With expertise in building a high-performing team, Damien is passionate about fostering innovation and unlock potential. Shane Zutz is the Vice President at Human Resources at DTK, where he oversees a global workforce of over 5,000. He's focusing on employee experience, organizational growth, and also operational excellence. Shane's leadership emphasizes creating opportunities for growth through strategic HR practices and also digital transformation. So some of the topics we're going to touch on today is like, how do you foster an ongoing feedback culture within your organization? We're also going to touch on balancing feedback with professional relationships that actually can lead to actionable outcomes. So I am excited about this episode. So Shane and Damien, welcome back. And I'm excited what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here and partner up with Shane. He's a leader I admire and always learn from. So looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome.
Same, Sannah. I'm not sure those descriptions are befitting of Damien and I, all the things that you said, but I know the one thing is I'm blessed to have gotten to know not only you and Damien, this idea that we're going to continue to learn and grow as long as we carry this leadership mantle is something that I think is super important, and excited to share more today.
Yeah. And it's just to have that, I think, like the positive or the open hat on, right? To say, I want to continue to learn because the world is changing. And you need to be in front of it, right? Or be proactive. And I think that's why we're, talking about feedback. I definitely know I can learn. So, and share. So, but let's jump in. We have a few questions, but let's just know the first one is, is like, how do you foster an ongoing dialogue feedback within your team? So who wants to kick this one off?
I'll jump in there if you don't mind, Shane, and then
go ahead.
obviously you can give me some feedback if my answer isn't very good.
I will take notes.
I think as we've been pondering this topic of feedback, I think there's some underlining assumptions that we need to be aware of as we dive in here. Number one, last time I attended your podcast, we spoke a lot about culture.
Yeah.
And I think this discussion around feedback assumes that there's a solid culture in place that promotes openness and feedback within that. Obviously, trust is vital in feedback. So I think we're going to make the assumption that there's a base level of trust between those that we're interacting with and giving feedback there. As well. And so I guess I just wanted to put them out there so we don't miss anything because we don't specifically mention those topics as we go in. But for me, when I think about fostering this environment of feedback, I use the term lead with intent. And I think you've got to be very intentional about this. It does relate to culture. At Norcom, for example, one of the pillars of our culture is blameless problem solving. And a lot of the time when there's a need for feedback through fear or busyness, we can let those things foster, which can create a lot of chatter going on behind the scenes, and the problem starts to grow. So I think, from a Norcom perspective, when we see those challenges, we get all the relevant parties in a room and we put the item to be discussed on the table and we hash it out there and then. And obviously there's a lot of feedback back and forth as part of that process, understanding the root cause and then putting in place what we need there. So it starts in our culture and then being intentional and not allowing these things to foster, but being brave in your leadership and tackling things head on. People get into that rhythm. They see that, which again fosters more ongoing feedback and collaboration from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Damien, you always lean into that first, and I appreciate that because sometimes it's easy for leaders to jump to solutions. Like in my one-on-ones, I have to do this. In my team meetings, I have to do this. But I think that if leaders hear anything, even the rest of the questions, creating that foundational trust and culture that Damien said, it is absolutely critical. And when you have that, then I think it allows a lot of the more traditional mechanisms that leaders use to inform things like their team meetings, like their one-on-ones, performance management systems, and all those types of things. But a lot of times leaders will just lean into that and say, okay, these are the things I know I have to do, I'm held accountable to do, and I do them, and they become a little checkboxy. And I don't think that if you have that inherent trust and culture, you're never going to get the true value out of those one-on-ones and team meetings that you could have. And that's where things start to fester. Damien, I love what you said is that you address things head on. You as a leader, if you're getting more triangulation back to you as a leader, that should be a signal and a sign that some of that trust and culture might be leaking just a little bit. And so then again, based on that as your foundation, then how do you come back into those things that you have control over, or the rhythm of work that you've established with your team? How do you leverage that then to lean into those different things? So that's maybe a little wider than feedback, both what Damien and I said, but you can't get into those things where, hey, Shane, I would like to talk to you about how you showed up in that meeting today and the potential impact it had. You can't get anywhere near that without those two other pieces really working together cohesively, for sure.
Yeah. I think one more important thing around the feedback here is also you need to have the time, right? And we're also like in a world, I sound like ChatGPT, but it's we're like, no, but it goes faster and faster sometimes, right? With technology, how we work, with projects, but sometimes you do need to slow down so you have time for this feedback or building this trust. I think you really have to have that in mind.
Yeah, Sannah, it's funny you mentioned that. I can't remember whether it was an audiobook or a podcast, something I was listening to recently, and someone shares a story of walking past their boss's office,
Yeah.
and they were just sat back in their chair staring off blankly, and they were about to run in the office because they thought they were having some health crisis or something. And the boss's assistant was like, no, it's okay, they're thinking.
Yeah.
And I don't think we see enough of that in the leadership offices of businesses around the world, is taking that step back, to your point, to think strategically and get the right context with our decisions, the feedback that we're giving, the strategic planning, all of that side of things. So maybe we need to promote a little more staring off out the window as leaders, and thinking through the challenges and opportunities we have ahead of us.
Yeah, no, but it's the same, right? Because I know if I'm working on a project, right, it's like, oh, I need some cute music, or I need some background, right? But sometimes you just need silence, just to reflect.
Yeah, and with feedback, you have to spend time thinking about that. If you always just jump in, a lot of times I'll talk to leaders about, we all have this autonomous gear that we use 60 to 70 to 80% of the time in our leadership, and that's actually okay, right? Otherwise we would, we probably wouldn't be in the role if it wasn't, at least mildly successful. But when you think about feedback, you have to be careful that and we'll get deeper into this, Sannah, of course, but that's where the time is so important, because how you deliver that feedback and making sure, and I won't give away the rest of the podcast, but there's certain ways that you have to deliver that feedback in a way that's going to be positive for them. And that doesn't mean you go around the issue, but if you don't slow down and you're coming at that quickly, like many of us go through our day, it's going to have a really unintended impact to that person. And then if you don't have that trust and culture that Damien said, they may not even let you know that it had that unintended impact. And you just really start to create this wideness of gap, and not only in the trust and culture, but in probably the performance and the engagement of that individual. So, I think a lot of leaders think about performance management and feedback is something, I got to do it, it's the end of the year. I'm telling you, if you can really embrace that and your team sees that you put a lot of time and effort and thoughtfulness, you're going to get that reward, not only for you as a leader in your company, but for them. And so I guess that encouragement of time is it's probably goes without saying is obviously a critical item as well, that probably gets dismissed pretty easily.
Yeah,
that's a great point, Shane. And I guess we've warmed up now, so we can dive right in. I've actually got a great example that kind of talks to what you shared there. I had an employee within the last probably 6 to 8 months that doing a great job, many aspects of their role, performing very, very well. There was one particular area that was somewhat of a concern. I wanted to give some feedback around that. And in the busyness of obviously our roles, I really didn't put the time in up front to fully understand the context of this feedback that I was giving, to think about the different elements of the role that they were really outperforming in, to consider the workload and things that were going on around them. And without giving that time, I got to the point of giving the feedback. And to your point, Shane, I probably relied on that automatic gear a little bit to get through it. And it went horrendously. The meeting was awful. Fortunately, we have a culture of feedback. So I did receive the feedback of how badly it went from the employee. And a few things came out of that. I think, number one, with feedback particularly, I think a lot of leaders can sometimes overthink it. They threat about it, they worry about it, because we have these unrealistic expectations of being perfect leaders. Now, I know Shane's pretty close to the perfect leader, but for the rest of us, it's far off. And so for me, I think that's one important thing with feedback. If it doesn't go right as a leader, what a great opportunity to learn from that and try and correct it and develop yourself and your own leadership as a result of that. The other really big thing that I took from it is the importance of self-reflection. I took a day before I went back to this employee and thought through how I approached it. Thought through the feedback I had received from them. And then after letting that sit for 24 hours, 48 hours, I can't remember exactly how long it was, I was able to go back to that employee, recognizing the feedback they had given me. The nature of the feedback that we gave in that second meeting remained the same. The feedback was valid. but it was a much more productive discussion because I had taken the time to reflect and have the right context and understanding of the situation to change my delivery vehicle of that feedback to make it more effective. So I guess number one, don't be afraid of messing up. You'll learn from that. And if you've got that trust and culture, you will have opportunities to go back and make course corrections. And then obviously the importance of taking a little time to reflect as well. Two just great tools in a recent example that I think are very relevant to this discussion.
Yeah.
Damien, it's almost very worthwhile for leaders to mess up once in a while, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think it does help you learn and grow and be sharp. I actually thought throughout my career I was really good at giving feedback in the moment because I felt like the trust and culture. And during my time at DigiKey, I think I've faltered in that a few times for sure. And I don't know that others would necessarily have seen it, but I felt it myself. And so, but I think at times, and maybe it was I was a little bit new to environment, switching from education to business, and I think I was overthinking it, Damien, right? And if people see that you're approaching them from a place of care, but hey, I don't have it all figured out, you don't have a big checklist you're trying to run through to get to this feedback, that's really important. And it's, as I, have glasses on today, if you take those off and, look through their lens, I think as long as you can do that, it's going to be received pretty well. But then when you do mess up, for Damien, for you to show that vulnerability and transparency, that is really the key. And Sannah, I don't know how many guests you've had on your podcast, and those two words have become a little bit buzzwordy in the leadership circles. And a lot of people talk about them, but I'm telling you, very few leaders would have the ability to show up human like Damien did and say, hey, I messed that up and I'd like to talk about it. Here are the things, though, that I'm seeing that I want to help you with, but I didn't do it in the right way. Do you mind taking another swing at this? And so I do think it's really important. And, we try to talk with our leaders a bit. How do you frame that up? Are you framing as an opportunity? Or are you framing it as you drop the ball in that meeting and now we have that impact? And so I just think leaders, again, if they're a little too quick, they're going to do the latter. If they spend a little time reflecting, they're going to lean in and they'll probably frame it the right way. I think most people inherently are pretty darn good and they're okay with some feedback. I mean, they really are. But I think we're so nervous to do so in many cases as a leader, we stay so far away from it. And then it makes it very difficult.
Yeah. And there's also the whole balance, right? Because you have your day job, right? And then when you have a team as well, suddenly you have everything from HR that you need to fill out as well. And it's like of course you get measured on both, right? And also how your team is performing. But there is sometimes where you're like, I've done it in the past, right? Where you're like, when you have the team, you're like, oh, I just need to, fill it out. And you do it a little bit maybe too fast because you're focusing on all the projects instead, where you really need to make sure that you are focusing on your team.
Yeah. Sannah and Damien, maybe I'll ask you a question back now. So, one of the things where I've gotten caught up too a little bit on feedback is trying to note two or three different things. And I've tried to be better at, okay, not three things don't matter. One matters more than the others, but how have you worked on and addressed that? Because I think it's hard sometimes because then what you receive from that individual at times, then you're connecting to that and you might be grabbing on, but how do you try to stay really kind of focused and specific on the thing that will help most? I sometimes struggle with that in trying to help too much.
Yeah. I think as you're setting, right, if you have more than one thing, focus, find out what matters the most because you can't move everything. I think that's the most important. And then have if there's any area that needs to be improved or being better or being proactive, I think one of the questions is always to say as a leader, right, how can I help you? Because maybe it's some visibility that's not there, right? Within the organization, they don't see or they don't hear. And maybe you sit with that information, but you're like, oh, I know it, right? But you don't think about sharing everything. That could be one thing. It could also just be some tools, right? What do they need? Or it could be an extra, like, sharing some feedback saying, I have these ideas, right? How do I get further with the project? It can be a lot of things where you just need a smaller thing to solve it. And I think it all ends with like better communication.
Yeah, great question, Shane. And it's something I've struggled with as well, is sometimes when you do spend the time to think through this stuff, you can come up with a laundry list of different topics you want to address. And I'm reminded of a quote from Stephen R. Covey. I probably messed this quote up, but it's along the lines of, you can be efficient with things, but you have to be effective with people. And sometimes we try and be efficient with people and, okay, I'm meeting with this person, let's check A, B, C, D all off the list at one time. And it's hard as a leader to step back and look at what has an impact. For me, Shane, one of the things I've tried to do more recently is within our business, we've got some things that are mission critical, right? They tie directly into our mission as an organization and the goals we're trying to achieve. Then we have lots and lots of things that what I would call mission support. They're there to help and support, but they're not the true needle movers. So when it comes to feedback, I've found looking through the lens of what is your overall goal as a department or as an organization, and then filtering that hit list of feedback against that. And what I found is, if you've got 4 items on the list, there will only be one of those that's mission critical. The rest are all mission support. And for me, it just helps to bring clarity to what we're trying to achieve with that. So I know what feedback to give, because this is going to have the biggest impact. But then also, when you look at the different vehicles that we use to give feedback, as humans, we can all get very defensive and take things personally. Mm-hmm. When you put that feedback in the context of, this is our mission, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this feedback is going to allow you to more fully achieve that mission and add value towards that mission, you're also in a position where you're taking away that personal attack, because you're focusing on a goal that's bigger than both of you, and you're there in that help and support role to help drive it forward. So I found a couple of benefits from taking that, overall goal or mission approach, both from a prioritization viewpoint, and then also to, get the right mindset for the discussion with whoever you're meeting with.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, that's really helpful to the individual as well, right, too, because it drives clarity. Just one quick add-on, Sannah. I shared a video today, and it talked about, you manage process, you don't manage people, you lead people. And it's a little bit of what you're saying, right? There's all these things, both of you said it in different ways, and there is a management side to leadership, and you have to be really good at it. Yeah. But I think what I'm hearing is this separation of know when to lead, and make sure you're not trying to manage people, but lead them. And I think that's a different mindset as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So something I've been puzzling about is, when I also look back in my career, is that you come into this organization and then you have the 360 reviews, right? So you need to give reviews to other, and maybe it's in your team or just in the bigger team. But nobody taught me how to actually give feedback to a colleague that's not in my team. And I'm like, okay, why is nobody focusing on, you have all this onboarding, right? This is the process, this is the tools, this is what we do, this is our mission. But I've never seen anyone was saying, and this is how we are, providing or giving feedback to each other, these are the tools, and this is how we're doing it. So what have you seen on your side?
Yeah, I think what we try to talk about, and I've been a part of that too, Sannah. I think 360s are a tool, and you're going to see a lot of research that doesn't value them, and you're going to see a lot of research that values them. So again, I think it's all in how you kind of lead through that. Yeah. I'll tell you one of the most positive examples I've ever seen around 360s. We had a gentleman in our company who's been here just a significant amount of time. I'm like 40 years. And he was on a management update, and we were talking about feedback or something around 360s. And he said, you know what I do? I make sure that I put my name behind every one of my comments, so that individual knows if I'm unclear, they can come back to me and have the conversation. And I even get goosebumps saying that, because it was one of the most powerful things by this kind of legendary DigiKey guy learning some new skills, because we didn't spend a ton of time early days on stuff like that. But anyway, the to go back is, and I'm not going to get this all correct. I maybe should have pulled it up, but we use the AIR model, and I'll maybe pull it up when Damien's talking. But it's really about getting very specific. Like, you can't just say, well, Shane's a nice guy. We really appreciate what he does, and he has some energy, which is feedback I get very generally.
Yeah.
And that's great. If I lose that, I think that's not good. But what is the impact of that energy or caring or empathetic nature to what we're trying to do in our business? Because Damien, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think you can be really a great person and things like that, but at the end of the day, our roles as leaders are to drive business performance, because if we don't, our impact on other families and downs, like if DigiKey doesn't do a great job, it's going to impact Damien's team members in some ways, and Sannah, yours as well, right? In this model that we have in our industry. So this idea around being specific and only giving one key piece of feedback, not trying to list 10 things, but just, hey, when you are in meetings and you pause and you ask the last question, I always find tremendous value in that, because you're able to connect a question that threads through what we're trying. So that's what we try to talk about a little bit at DigiKey in those feedback, circles. How are you able to show the behavior that was demonstrated and the impact of that behavior?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great example, Shane, of signing his name there.
I know, it's awesome.
Yeah. Sometimes the feedback happens behind people's backs, and it's not until like the annual review that it comes out, and you don't always know the source of that feedback, and therefore you don't have the context and clarity around it. So I think that one example alone, if you don't take anything else away, but the feedback that you give, as Shane said, having it be specific, well thought through, and then giving the opportunity to receive feedback in return to your feedback. Let them ask questions, let them gain the clarity that they need, because ultimately I think all leaders that are in leadership for the right reasons are there to help. They're there to help their team, help individuals to see and achieve their potential. And when you're approaching it from that viewpoint, people tend to be much more receptive. They know you're on their team, and you're there to support them and help them through it. So they're open to having those transparent discussions, but they need to know the source of that feedback there. To your original question, I'm in the same boat. I've never been given any formal training on how you should give feedback. There's obviously lots of books and such like out there that you can utilize, but you certainly learn as you.
Oh yeah,
you
definitely.
Yeah. I think this can be applied to any leadership skill, whether there's formal training on it or not. But to my earlier point is, I would argue if you're not screwing up from time to time as a leader, you're not being a very effective leader, because you're not pushing your leadership and trying new things. And for me, it's all about consistency, right? When you show up consistently as a leader, the way you're giving your feedback is consistent. Your desire to help and develop your team is consistent. The skill set, if you like, is almost secondary to that, because people know it's coming from a good place. They'll give you a little bit of slack, given that they know you're trying, you're doing your best. And so for me, that's always just been helpful, is knowing what your purpose is, showing up with that purpose, being consistent with it. And then when you slip up along the way, you'll generally find forgiveness from your teams and opportunities to learn and develop your leaderships.
Yeah, definitely. I think just reflecting a little bit back of what we already talked about is that when you have your, the meeting, right, it's the one-on-one, right, the giving that feedback. It's almost like you need a second meeting reflecting, right, because it takes time to, when you receive all this feedback, you need some time as well just to think about it. As just what you said, Damien, right? When you got your feedback, right? You took your 40 hours, and then you actually had and saying, okay, let's talk again. But I don't think that's in general that you have like a follow-up on your feedback. But I think it's really valuable. And I know for myself as well, right? If somebody's like overloading you with, maybe it's 80% positive, right? And then you get 10% that's saying, hey, you need to improve on this part. You only remember the 10% because you're like, what? But it takes time to reflect on it. And then I think it's so good if you have that open dialogue and the trust in the company and within your team that you can say, okay, now, I heard it. I thought about it. I know I said this, but let's have a deeper conversation about it. I think it's really important because it takes time to think about it, right? And saying, this is the way I want to go, or this is the way I want to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Shane's been great at sharing leadership nuggets with people within his network. And I can't remember when it was. This may be even 5-6 months ago. Shane sent something out, and there was a piece in there that really resonated with me that ties into this. And it was basically along the lines of where there's high expectations, there has to be high support. That's where you're going to get the result. Yep. And I think as leaders, we focus so much on the expectation side of things. So we're focusing on the feedback, the context of the feedback, how to deliver that feedback. And unfortunately, because of the nature of our jobs, the busyness, once we've given the feedback, it's almost like, okay, I'm done. I've done my part. I'm the employee now.
Yeah.
And so since learning that from Shane, I've tried to implement that. I do have high expectations of my team. I think that's critical to us achieving our goals. But as a leader, how can I offer a higher level of support, whether that's time on talking through different solutions on the feedback, whether that's just simply giving the time to follow up. How are you getting on based on our last discussion? What are the challenges? Do you need any resources or assistance in helping? So yeah, I think there's probably a gap in lots of people's leadership, and there certainly was in mine, in looking at that after feedback element and that high support element. And where I've been able to implement that successfully, we've seen some tremendous results. People are on board. They see that you walk your talk. You really want them to be successful, and you're giving them the support and resources and help that they need. So high expectations must always be matched with high support. I think is huge in having a successful feedback system.
Yeah.
Yeah, Damien, I wish I could recall things as easily as you can on stuff like that, because it's really key during this time. He's really good at it. Let me share an example of something that we used in our company this year around the last couple of topics we've had just in the last few minutes. So sometimes, when I prepare like year-end review, and I think about, okay, if I have one opportunity to give constructive feedback to this individual, what would it be? Just like everything we said, very specific, and it helps them and has an impact. So this idea of how do you inform that? And again, I stole this fair and square from somebody, but I created a Microsoft forum, and I just did a stop, start, continue. Okay. And then, so let me just use a leader on my team. And then I sent it to some of their business partners, some of their colleagues. I didn't send it to them. And basically what I did, and it wasn't like stop. I think if you have behaviors that need to stop, you don't wait for any sort of feedback. You get them to stop. So it's just like, where do they have opportunities to kind of switch some of their focus, right? It's more around that. And then what are things that they need to continue, which leans into, hey, these are the strengths that I see in you as an individual and as a leader. Keep leaning into those, behaviors to start and then to continue, like I said. And so when I sent that out, I had done my work ahead of time with my leaders, and I put down for each one of them what I thought would be a theme of feedback that I think would be helpful to them. And believe me, I got very lucky this time and fortunate. The stuff that came back from across the business and their colleagues fit into that same framework that I had. And so that made me feel good. I'll be honest with you. And you would ask me that 4 or 5 years ago, I would have had a mismatched, and that was on me. That's not on my team. And so when you think about validation, I don't think you should run around the business and say, hey, I want feedback on Sannah and Damien. But how do you do it in a positive manner that you recognize their impact to those business leaders? So that's something I use to kind of validate. And Damien, I think it does align back to the high expectations, high support, because you are getting a little bit wider without this onerous kind of 360 feedback, which again, I think there's time and place for that. But I struggle with doing that every single year, whereas I think you can kind of do short little bursts of activity that can provide just about the same level of impact. So I wanted to share that and connect it with
I
those
love
things.
I've used that in previous companies as well, but that it was not on the individual. That was more on the company to say, what are we doing well, right? What should we do? And then what should we stop?
I think for me, one of the critical parts, and we've not really touched on that yet, is using that, start, stop, continue. It makes you focus on a lot of the value that they're already bringing and the positives that people
Great
have.
point.
Is, as leaders in life, certainly when I think to my home life with my kids and such, like, it's very easy to give feedback on the improvement opportunities. And sometimes we're not as good at looking at the positives. And I actually, every week I have a meeting with my leadership team, and I asked them, we had it just yesterday, I asked them about feedback and the impact of feedback on them and what they like, what they don't like in preparation for this. And resounding answer back was recognizing all of the value that we bring to the table across the board. And, I think as leaders, we have to do a better job of just paying attention. All it takes is looking for those opportunities to give positive feedback. I think there's a book, The 1 Minute Manager, very, very short, but one of the points there is, catch people doing something right or catch them doing something good. And just it takes 10 seconds out of your day to recognize that, to send an email or verbally, like, great job in that meeting. I was really impressed with how you handled this specific point. So as leaders, yes, we need to be able to give some of the improvement opportunity feedback in a constructive and positive manner. But it's really easy to give positive feedback in a positive manner and have people feel good about that. I think we need to not underestimate the impact of that.
And when you do that as well, I think the one who's receiving it is like, oh my God, they're actually noticing, right? I'm not just invisible. And by doing that, you're watering the plant, right? Even more. So it will grow even more. I think that's so important, that it's not like just pointing fingers and saying you're not good at that, not good at that, right? You're actually showing and saying, this is amazing, right? Keep doing it.
And the example I gave earlier of the feedback that I gave that went terribly, that was one of the faults. I had this laundry list, as Shane mentioned earlier, and I wanted to check them all off my list. I ignored all the areas that they were doing great in. And so it was an imbalance in the feedback that I was giving. So I've certainly still got a lot to learn on that front. And that one example helped with that, as far as kickstarting, catching people doing things right.
Yeah, and there's also different ways of how do you deliver it, like a message like that, right? It's not like you're saying, oh, you're great at this ABC, but, and then you start, right? That's different ways, right? If it's like using what Shane just said, right? Like continue, right? Stop, right? And start doing this. That's different ways to say it. So that person who's receiving the feedback is still feeling, good about it.
And the other thing that I think words really matter, and I know that's probably kind of a Captain Obvious statement. And Damien, it's super interesting you brought the word value. I don't know that I have a word of the year that I'm trying to follow, but value has been something that I've used a lot already in 2025. Because a lot of the work that you can do in HR, and I lean into some of the finance stuff for DigiKey too as well. You can do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, are they truly driving value? So that's more of a business lens. But when you think about your people, I can say, oh, a great job getting that done. Or I can say, do you realize by you getting that done and completed early, and then you added some pieces in that from an adjacent market that we didn't have in there before, that allows us to ask these questions, and here's the potential value. And so that's why I think value for me is kind of this trigger of there's more there, Shane. Like, don't just say great job. Like there's nothing to that. Did you know by you just really being patient today in that meeting, do you know what you did for Damien? Did you see Damien's face by you allowing him to have that room and own that kind of win? So that's where I do love that word value. I think it brings a different kind of responsibility to leaders, and especially in this topic. So I wanted to add that as well. I really do value that word, so to speak.
If I take nothing from this discussion, I made a note of that. I love that. It all goes back to the earlier discussion of the mission and how they're adding value. When you can tie it back to your strategy, your mission, your culture, it reinforces those things that we're trying to put in place, and it brings a lot more value to the feedback that you're giving to the employee, because you're being very, very specific. You're showing the impact of the work that they're doing and what it's having on their teams and the organization as a whole. So I've made a note of that one. That's gold right there.
I made a note as well. No.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on the episode of Leadership Manufacturing Podcast. And this is where we talked about the importance of feedback and how it can shape a team's success. And we're not stopping here, because in episode 113, we'll continue this conversation, and we're going to talk about the mechanics of performance review, if it's annual, quarterly, or continuous. And we're also going to explore what truly works for building effective feedback loops in an organization. So don't miss out for the next episode. And in the meantime, stay curious, keep learning, and remember, please subscribe to our newsletter. You can find it on leadershipmanufacturing.com, and see you next time.